You're watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Revi, and joining us from Miami, Florida, is Cleo Paskal. She's a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defence of Democracies and also an associate fellow with Chatham House. Ms. Paskal, thank you so much for giving us time so late in the night.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for your interest in the topic. It's pretty important.
And of course, a Happy New Year. And many would have hoped at least that New Year would have better news, but absolutely crazy scenes at the Capitol. We've seen reactions from former presidents, the president-elect, the president himself. Your thoughts on that?
So there are a few things that we know for sure, and there are a lot of things that we don't know, and it may take a very long time to know. So chronologically, in terms of today, what we know is that there were rallies, peaceful rallies at the beginning of the day with very large numbers of people, possibly hundreds of thousands of people came out in response to President Trump's call to come to the Stop the Steal rally. And then as that was winding down, a much smaller group of protesters, or this is even the terminology around what to call people now has become very contested. So I'm going to use the term protesters, broke through the barriers at the Capitol building where the Congress, the House, Senate meet, and got into the building. Now, there have been demonstrations that have happened on the steps of the Capitol building before, but getting into the Capitol building itself may not have happened maybe ever, very, very long time. And that caused the shutting down of what was going on inside, which was the certification of the Electoral College votes, which should have determined officially the president-elect Biden's position. Now, because it was stopped, he hasn't been officially certified as of yet. This is evening time on Wednesday. And it's restarted, but we don't know whether it will go on for a longer time or shorter time. The other thing we know is that there were bombs placed at the Republican National Convention building and possibly at the Democratic equivalent as well, waiting for confirmation on that. One protester was killed by the police, shot in the neck.
There are other unconfirmed reports of a person falling off, I think a scaffolding or a balcony which they were trying to get in. As you're pointing out, protesters, the term terrorists has been used in rioters, mob, anarchy, insurrection, all kinds of words being bandied about, but absolutely shocking images of what's really happened, and many blaming President Trump for inciting them, including former presidents.
Yes, there are, and I would say that given what happened, now we get into the questions that will take a very long time to resolve. Which is, first of all, how they got into the building in the first place, because everybody knew this demonstration was likely for a very long time, and you didn't see the sort of riot police in place that we saw during the Black Lives Matter protests, for example. But similarly, commendably, once they did break in, there were injuries on both sides. There were law enforcement officials who were injured, protesters injured, but it wasn't a massacre, which it very well could have been. So there was a commendable level of restraint on the part of the law enforcement officials who were securing the building, and they just dealt with it and got them out. And now they've resumed the vote. So we'll have to disaggregate going forward how they got into the building, how the securing was done, how the injuries happened. But it could have been very, very different. It could have been much bloodier. So yes, it was bad. But Chuck Schumer referred to it as a day that will live in infamy, comparing it to Pearl Harbor. I don't think we're quite there.
In terms of the reactions that we've seen, Facebook and Twitter, I think Facebook has taken down President Trump's video. Twitter has suspended him for about 12 hours with more threats as well. The reactions that came from President Trump, initially he was calling for them to be peaceful. It was only later on that he asked them to leave. And what President-elect Biden said when he spoke to the nation or to the world. How do you see those two?
So I think that you've put your finger on a very relevant point that is, again, going to be something that resonates down the wire, which is how information is going to be transmitted in the future. Because Trump did put out the Twitter appeal for his supporters to go home. And he started it by saying that, yes, the vote was stolen, but I want you to go home. That was, I think, psychologically probably the only thing that would work to get them home. But Twitter blocked it because it considered it a false claim about the election. So they were more interested in blocking the alleged false claim about the election than they were about getting people home safely. And then, as you mentioned, he was blocked from Twitter for 12 hours. So I suspect that what will happen is just in the way that you're seeing a split in the Republican Party, you'll see probably a split in social media and mainstream media, with another media ecosystem developing, which will cater more towards the sort of people you saw at the demonstration today.
When you're talking about, say, the split in the Republican Party, we saw Vice President Pence and how he reacted to that. And, President Trump has been criticizing him the whole day long, and many say he's been thrown under the bus. When the Congress resumed again, Pence spoke. Your reactions to that?
So what happened today, the events of today, what they were about was each state presents its electoral votes, and then the House and the Senate are supposed to certify them. If somebody from the House and somebody from the Senate objects, then it goes to a 2-hour debate. And in that 2-hour debate, that's when the Republicans who were concerned about election integrity and thought that this was a stolen election were going to present their evidence, or what they thought was their evidence, for this stolen election as they see it. So if you watch the video of what was going on when it was shut down, they were just about to discuss Arizona. And in fact, there was a description of the voting discrepancies in Arizona that was going on when it was shut down. So what we'll now have to see is whether those grievances ever get a chance to be aired, because a lot of what the protest is about, the anger is about, and I'm not talking about the guys, please, I'm not talking about the guys in the building, I'm talking about the hundreds of thousands that were there, is they feel that their investigation was never done. So it's not that, they're asking necessarily for a change in the result. What they're saying is there's all this, from their point of view, evidence, and the Department of Justice never investigated. So it's a festering wound, and they feel disenfranchised from the social contract between the voter and their government. All that would be needed to diffuse the situation is for the Department of Justice to actually openly investigate and either discount or prove some of these allegations.
When you're talking about disenfranchisement, the numbers who even voted for President Trump are so huge, the largest ever, except for Biden got more than that. The divide within the US, that in itself is what is showing, is manifesting itself in the events that happened today.
Yeah, well, there's that. And also, there's been month-long acceptance of a level of violence in society. So you see these autonomous zones getting set up in some of these cities. You see protesters from the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, torching buildings, and you don't really see any crackdown on that. So you're creating, you see some, but there are still areas that have become quite lawless, like you can see in Seattle or Portland. So the precedent has been set. It's kind of like there's an acceptance of a certain level of violence. And so people on the other side are saying, well, if the extreme left can be that violent and get away with it, then maybe that's what needs to happen from our side in order to get our voices heard. So you really need to get into a situation where violence against society is not tolerated on any side. That's what it would take to begin to lower some of those seemingly condoned behaviors, and do the investigations in a transparent manner so that people feel like their concerns are at least being heard if they're not being addressed.
But what about the foundation of any democracy, especially the American democracy, which is a peaceful transition of power, and how President Trump has been, many are in fact holding him responsible, ex-president saying he's the one who lit the match.
Yeah, so this is, it's definitely not an ideal situation. He's representing a very deep level of anger in a lot of America currently. It's extremely divided. And now I think what'll happen is, just to be clear, this stuff, the violence was condemned, Trump Jr. condemned it. Trump said, "Don't be violent, go home." There has been some condemnation of that. However, he also did say, go to the Capitol and let them know you're not happy. So, that's not ideal. So it's a very thin line. But given what he genuinely thinks happened, which is a corruption of the Constitution and that core social contract, there are probably a lot of people, I'm not agreeing, but a lot of people who feel that that's what their patriotic duty is to do, is to protest that to the best of their abilities in a peaceful fashion, which is what hundreds of thousands of people did today, and a few thousand didn't. So it's kind of, if you're of that mindset, and again, I'm reporting, I'm not saying, but if you're of a mindset where you think that the election was stolen, and that you're heading towards a one-party state, because if the Democrats control Congress, the Senate, and the White House, they can rewrite election laws. And so you're going to be losing the foundation of the social contract between you and the state. Then sitting at home and doing nothing doesn't seem like the right response either. It's in a really bad place. The division of information, the acceptance of levels of violence on both sides. This isn't good.
And that division, again, just going back to it, in the Republican Party itself, Vice President Pence, we've seen already reports that apart from the resignations, we've already seen that there could be senior officials, possibly even as senior as the NSA and the deputy NSA and possibly the chief of staff also resigning. The distancing, if that happens, and some reports, again, source-based, that American media is pointing out, CNN, I think, that the White House officials had started, or some of them had started, preliminary discussions on invoking the 25th Amendment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of that is in the air. That's how febrile, how tense the situation is. I think in terms of kind of looking forward and things like the future of the Republican Party, what you're starting to see is a lot of younger Republicans who are socially conservative, but have kind of more broader views economically, for example, who are extremely displeased with people like Romney, for example, or Pence, and they would want to fight this. And so what the discussions you can see online are about is putting together consortiums of lawyers who have these points of view to continuously challenge the election laws, to make sure that you don't see a repeat of the kind of relaxation of laws that you got justified by COVID put in place permanently. And including things like starting to run at the local level, so that the city clerks, who are very influential in counting ballots, are usually Democrat, because a lot of Democrats run at the local city level. For whatever reason, Republicans tend not to. So to have Republicans to run against them. So there's been through their lens of how the election was manipulated, they're starting to look for different entry points into the electoral system where they think they can gain traction to try to do a course correction on what they think is happening.
And in terms of the electoral system, you briefly mentioned it in the Georgia runoff. If the projections that the official that the mainstream media is giving, that the Democrats have taken that too, and it's 50-50. Kamala Harris will be the casting vote. So then Congress goes the Democratic way as well. How do you see that developing in the future, the White House and the Congress, as you mentioned earlier?
Well, yeah, so there are three branches of government in the U.S. There's the judiciary, there's the House, and there's the executive. And so two of the three now will be with the Democrats. It's very difficult to know what their agenda will be. One of the first things that Nancy Pelosi passed in the House was around gender language, like not to use words like mother or grandmother because it can be offensive to people who have different concepts of gender. So we don't know whether we're going to start to see more like that. But that is kind of very far away from where mainstream America, both Republican and Democrat, are. So in the same way that the Republican Party is doing whatever it's doing, I think there are going to be a lot of mainstream Democrats, if you start to see this kind of agenda being pushed more and more, going, what is this party doing for us? And of course, my big concern is China. So, for me, the question is, what will this do to the U.S. relationship with China? And there was a sort of a disconcerting indication when Trump signed an executive order saying you can't invest, you can't list Chinese companies with links to the Chinese military on the U.S. stock market, and the New York Stock Exchange announced it was going to delist certain Chinese companies, and recently canceled that. So I think that they canceled it in the expectation that Biden wouldn't object. So if that's the case, then the New York Stock Exchange seems to think that a Biden presidency is going to be fine with American investors putting money into Chinese companies that are linked to the Chinese military. So I hope they're wrong, but that's the sort of kind of leverage point or inflection point that's worth looking for, to see what this will actually mean in terms of the U.S. relationship with China.
And interestingly, since you brought up China, I mean, there are going to be reactions on what happened, the developments in the capital from China. We've seen Turkey already trolling, Venezuela trolling when it comes to democracy and the US.
Yeah, this is great for China. I mean, China loves this. It's very overtly been fomenting dissent in China, in the US, through various political warfare means for a very long time. So this is, the bonanza for them. I'm sure, Xi is sitting there with his popcorn, smiling, watching what's going on. It's, it's extremely sad. We've come to just assume that the U.S. will be this power, whether you like it or not, or you have, conflicting relationships with it, all that sort of stuff. But to see an America that becomes so severely weakened internally that, who knows what will happen with the Quad, who knows what will happen with all sorts of other relationships, is really disconcerting. And I think that's probably why the existing Trump administration opening up the warehouse and selling weapons to Taiwan and signing the deals with India, sort of just in case, so that allies can defend themselves in case the next administration is less concerned about those issues.
Cleo Paskal, again, greatly appreciate your time so late in the night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just a reminder to our viewers, if you like our kind of journalism, do go on to our website to support us. Do follow our social media handles on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. You've been watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh P.